اللهم صل على محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع لذنوبنا وتبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وعمل صالح إن شاء الله، بذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. أما بعد، فقد قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أعلم حيث يجعل رسالته، آمنا بالله، صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today marks the birth anniversary of the second holy Imam, Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba, or Imam Hasan al-Zaki al-Mujtaba alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. You find the day that he was born, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam turns to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi and he says, Ya Rasulullah, it is an honor to have you name this child. Upon which the Holy Prophet, remember, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam never preceded before the Holy Prophet of Islam. Imam Hasan was the first grandchild of the family. And so he turns to the Holy Prophet of Islam and he says, it would be an honor if you were to name this child. Upon which the Holy Prophet of Islam, he says to the Imam alayhi salam, you are to me as Harun was to Musa. Name him as to how Harun's son was named. Upon which the Imam replies, he says, what was Harun's son's name? He says the name of Harun's son, his firstborn was Shubbar. He says that we are Arabs. What is the Arabic equivalent to Shubbar? He says that the Arabic equivalent to Shubbar is Hasan. And it was the first time that the word Hasan was used as a name for any individual of the time. This is a barakah that is exclusive for Imam Hasan al-Zaki alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Because of this, you realize that the interactions between Imam Ali alayhi salam and Imam Hasan alayhi salam were very different. It was strikingly different. And the reason being is because the Imam never saw Imam Hasan as his son. He always treated him as if he was the son of Rasulullah. Of course, the Holy Prophet of Islam, the intimate relationship that he had with his grandsons was something that was very different. No companion had seen the level of affection that was shown by the Prophet towards his grandson. They had never seen anything like it before. Of course, the culture that they grew up in was a culture of ignorance. It was a culture of jahiliyyah. And so the Imam's interaction with his own son was different. Even at times you find that many of the narrations, when he speaks to his son, either he refers to his son as Ya Bunayya, but at times he would refer to his son as Yabna Rasulullah, O son of the Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a beautiful narration in the Battle of Jamal. You see that when the opposition came and stood against Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, in the Battle of Jamal, the opposition, they had this camel. And the camel was the symbol of the opposition that was demonstrated towards Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. That camel was a symbol of resistance against the Imam and his movement. And so the Imam realized that if the camel was to be taken down, then the whole resistance would fall apart. That camel had significant meaning behind its presence. So the Imam alayhi salam turns to his son Muhammad ibn Hanafiya and he says, Muhammad, take this spear and penetrate the ranks of the enemy lines. Come towards the camel and strike it, kill it. If the camel dies, then a lot of lives will be saved and the resistance will fall apart and the battle will come to an end. Muhammad ibn Hanafiya, he enters the battlefield, he fights, and he fights. There's a lot of resistance. They shower arrows upon him and his battalion. And eventually he retreats. When he comes back to the Imam alayhi salam, he says, it's nearly impossible. The guards, the resistance is too strong. I cannot penetrate the enemy ranks to strike the camel. The Imam alayhi salam takes the spear and he gives it to his son, Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. And he says to his son, go. And the Imam alayhi salam, when he enters the battlefield, he penetrates the enemy ranks. He comes towards the camel and he strikes the camel. Soon after that, the whole entire resistance in the battle of Jamal falls apart. It begins to dissipate very slowly. And so when the Imam alayhi salam returns to Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam and he says, Muhammad ibn Hanafiya, he sees this. And him all wounded and battered, he turns to his father, he says, how was it possible for Imam Hasan to penetrate the enemy ranks and to slaughter the camel when I was not even able to do so? Upon which the Imam alayhi salam turns to him and he says, Ya Muhammad, you are my son. Whereas Hasan alayhi salam, Muhammad ibn Hanafiya, when he heard this answer, he said, but Hasan is your son as well. He says, no, he is the son of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. So that difference, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allow the salawat, inshallah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So that difference was very much made from the interactions that these two had, the father and the son. And what's interesting is that Imam alayhi salam knew that Imam Hasan would then take on the position of imama. And so slowly he began to show the people his position in society. Slowly he began to give responsibilities to Imam Hasan alayhi salam, because he knew that after a while he would leave this dunya and that responsibility, that burden of Imam would come on the shoulders of Imam Hasan alayhi salam. So the Battle of Jamal was one demonstration. Imam alayhi salam wanted to show that a person like Muhammad ibn Hanafiya, who is so close to the Imam alayhi salam, there are certain limitations that he has. But when that same responsibility is given to Imam Hasan alayhi salam, he fulfills it in the best of ways. None other can fulfill it except for him. It was an indication to show the people that he is the caliph or the imam after me. The way the Prophet would, of course, test his companions. In Khaybar, for example, he would send the first, the second, and then he would send Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. This was a direct message to this people that there is a person amongst you who is not like you, and he will therefore carry on the message after I am gone. The Imam treated Imam Hasan in a very similar way. The Battle of Jamal is just one example. Another example is that he would often refer to Imam Hasan alayhi salam to execute certain affairs. When he was in Kufa, and of course in the month of Ramadan, when the Muslims began to recite Salat al-Taraweeh, a bid'ah that existed in the time, he would send his son to go towards Masjid al-Kufa and to deter the people from praying and engaging in Salat al-Taraweeh. When Imam Hasan alayhi salam saw the amount of opposition that was faced, he returns to Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam and the Imam says to him, let them be. If they wish to carry on the sunnah of such and such person, then let him carry on the sunnah of such and such person. In other examples, for example, you find that the Imam alayhi salam would often allow his son to take on the position of imamah. Of course, not entirely, but certain aspects of imamah. Again, to show the public that the responsibility of imamah will soon go into the hands of Imam Hasan alayhi salam. They say a man came towards Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. When he came towards the Imam alayhi salam, he came and he was entirely covered. His face was veiled. And so when the Imam saw him, the Imam realized that there's something off with this person. The man came towards the Imam and he said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, I have a series of questions for you. And the Imam alayhi salam, he says, what are these questions? As in, where are you from? I've not seen you in these lands. And the Imam says, I'm just a person who lives in this area. I've come with a series of questions. He says, no, there's a bit more to that. The man, after having just a few questions being presented to him, confesses. He says, I am in fact a Shami. I've come from Sham. Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan has sent me. He says, why has Muawiyah sent you to me? He says, Muawiyah has sent me to you because a series of questions have come from the Caesar of Rome, and he wishes to know the answers to these questions. Now, at the time, When Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam had his grudge with Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, the war that broke out between the two, in the sidelines, the Caesar of Rome, the king of Rome, saw what was going on. The news reached him that the Muslims are fighting between themselves. There is a caliph from Syria, and then there is a caliph from Kufa, and they are fighting for the Khilafah. So now the Caesar of Rome is interested as to what's going on in the Muslim empire. And he says to himself, I will test both of these caliphs. If they are able to answer my questions, I will test them by asking a series of questions. If they are capable of answering my questions, then I know who the truth is with. So he would send series of questions to Muawiyah, and he would send series of questions to the Imam alayhi salam. And so a series of questions were sent to Muawiyah. Muawiyah had not the foggiest of what the answers were, so he sends a spy, a delegation towards Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. So he confesses all of this to the Imam alayhi salam. The Imam says to him, he says, ask your questions. Now some of you may ask, why does the Imam voluntarily answer these questions? Well, the Imam knew that even if Muawiyah was to plagiarize his answers, the Caesar of Rome would know eventually. And this would not affect in Muawiyah's reputation at all. So he says to the person, ask. But before you ask, it's better you ask my son, Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. So Imam al-Hasan was brought forth. And then the Caesar of Rome, the messenger, he begins to ask this series of questions. He says the first question, what is the difference between right and wrong, truth and falsehood? Upon which the Imam replies, the distance between right and wrong is 4 fingers. You may hear many things many a times, and it may not be correct, but what you see is always deemed correct. He says, what is the distance between the heavens and the earth? He says the distance between the heaven and the earth is the dua of the mazlum. The dua of the mazlum, there are no veils between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We all have veils between us and Allah, and sometimes these veils block our supplications from reaching the heavens. As for the mazlum, there is no distance between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, what is the distance between the east and the west? He says the distance between the east and the west is the movement of the sun. We all wait for the night and the day. He says there are 10 things. Each of these 10 things are stronger than the other. What are they? He says Allah has created the rock, and the rock is hard. But hadid, iron, is harder than the rock. He says fire melts the iron. He says water extinguishes the fire. He says the cloud holds the water. The wind pushes the cloud. The angels control the wind. Malik al-Maut has dominion over all of the other angels. Death will one day overpower Malik al-Maut. Allah's Amr is none like His creation. Allah's Amr has dominion over death itself. When the person began to hear the answers of Imam Hasan alayhi salam, he begins to write this down. He begins to write these down, and after the answers are finished, and there's a series of questions. And this is, of course, mentioned in Tabrasi's book, Al-Ihtijaj. A series of questions are presented to the Imam. The Imam answers all of them, and then the Shami, in the end, he turns to him and he says, I witness that you, Ya Ali, are the wasi of Rasulullah. And then he writes these questions down, and he takes them towards Muawiyah. Muawiyah sends them to the Caesar of Rome. When he reads these answers, he says, these answers are not from you, Ya Muawiyah. These answers are from the household of the Prophet of Islam, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Ya Ali. So naturally you found that Imam Hasan alayhi salam was given certain responsibilities by his own father, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. When Imam Hasan alayhi salam took on the Khilafah after the passing of his father, of course there's a peace treaty that takes place, the civil war with Muawiyah, then the peace treaty. When the peace treaty is signed, he decides to return to the city of Medina, the city of his grandfather. And he lives there for the next 10 years of his life until he is assassinated. When he returns to the city of Medina, you find that Muawiyah, sitting in Sham, begins to employ certain tactics to try and demean the position of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. One of them was the tafsir of the Holy Quran. He begins to employ certain individuals like Samara ibn Jundub or Sumra ibn Jundub. He takes great assets and wealth from Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, and he begins to deliver tafsir of the Holy Quran. Certain verses that were revealed in honor of Amir al-Mu'mineen all of a sudden became in honor of Ibn Muljim alayhi al-la'na. You find that these tafasirs have even certain ramifications even today. When you refer to certain tafasirs of the Ahl Sunnah, certain of these narrations are mentioned, which existed in the time of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. Then you have, for example, the Friday prayers and the insults that was directed towards Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. You find, for example, in the marketplaces in Sham, Abu Darda mentions, he says, when he confronts Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, he says, why have you allowed riba, interest, to dominate the markets of Sham? So riba essentially became part of every transaction. And beyond this, many other bid'at, Muawiyah began to instill within the religion of Islam. Imam Hasan alayhi salam, sitting in Medina, he begins to retaliate. But he retaliates very professionally. He retaliates very succinctly. And he makes sure to show the people and to allow them to understand that there is a version of Islam that roots back to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. And it's not necessarily the religion of Islam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. And it's not necessarily the religion of Islam that is being presented by the Caliph of the Muslim Ummah. How does the Imam alayhi salam defend the message of Rasulullah? That's the question. When we refer to Amir al-Mu'mineen, through his patience, he preserves the message of Rasulullah. Imam al-Husayn Karbala, Imam al-Sadiq, Imam al-Baqir alayhim salam, it was the institution, yes, the hawzat that they created in Medina. You find that every Imam had a responsibility to preserve the message of Rasulullah. But how did Imam Hasan alayhi salam preserve the message of the Holy Prophet of Islam? It was through giving, the act of giving, ita'. This is how the Imam alayhi salam utilized this strategy to defend the message of Islam. Ita', the act of giving. What did he give? There were three things that he gave. Number one, his knowledge. Number two, his akhlaq, his kindness. And number three, it was his wealth. In regards to his knowledge, there are many beautiful narrations that explain the knowledge of Imam Hasan alayhi salam. As the Ahl Sunnah, even they testify that in the time of Imam al-Hasan, there was not a single person who was more knowledgeable than he was. He was أعلم الناس في زمانه وأزهد وأفضل. That he was considered to be the most knowledgeable. He was considered to be a man of asceticism. And then he was considered to be the best amongst his time. In terms of his knowledge, they say every morning in Salat al-Fajr, he would go to Masjid al-Nabi, he would recite Salat al-Fajr, and then he would recite certain salawat until it was the time of sunrise. And then after sunrise, he would sit in Masjid al-Nabi. The people would come around him and they would sit. And many people would come and sit, and he would teach them. He would teach them about the ahkam, fiqh. He would teach them about theology. He would teach them about the tafsir of the Holy Quran, and so on and so forth. One day a man enters Masjid al-Nabi at that time in the morning, and he sees many different halaqat, many small circles of teachers and students sitting and studying. When he comes towards one of these circles, he asks a question. He says, what is the tafsir of washahidi wal mashhud? Upon which Ash-Shahidi wal Mashhud, meaning the one who witnesses and the one who is witnessed, upon which he gets an answer, and then he moves on to the second circle, he gets a different answer, he moves on to the third circle, he gets a different answer. Then he comes towards Imam Hasan alayhi salam, and then he asks, he says, Yabna Rasulullah, what is the meaning, the tafsir of washahidi wal mashhud? Upon which the Imam says, the witness, the one who witnesses, is none other than the Holy Prophet of Islam. And the one who is witnessed is in reference to the Day of Judgment. What does it mean? He says the tafsir of this verse is that there is no shadow of a doubt that the Holy Prophet of Islam witnesses all of our actions, our deeds as well as our misdeeds, and he will testify this on the Day of Judgment. He says, Ya ibn Rasulullah, there's an ayah in the Holy Quran that Allah commands the Prophet to seek mashwara, that's to seek counsel amongst his people. How can this be, considering that everyone is beneath the Holy Prophet of Islam intellectually? He says it wasn't for the Prophet of Islam to counsel, or it wasn't the case that he was in need of counsel. It was to establish a sunnah within the Muslim nation that the people themselves should be used to and should consult with one another, especially in affairs that they have no knowledge with. Then you find in terms of his knowledge, he began to indicate certain tafasirs of the Holy Quran. He began to expound on certain theological aspects, and of course in terms of fiqh as well. In terms of his wealth, his generosity was well known. Imam al-Kadhim was known as al-Kadhim because he suppressed his anger. Imam al-Jawad was known because of his generosity. Imam al-Sadiq was known because of his knowledge and his truthfulness. Imam al-Hasan al-Zaki was known to be extremely generous in his time. And he used generosity to preserve the message of Islam. At times he would give away his entire wealth. In fact, the riwayat mentions, historical records tell us that twice in his life he gave away his entire wealth. 3 times he gave away half of his wealth. At times a beggar would come towards him and say, Ibn Rasulillah, I'm in need of financial aid. He would turn to his accountant and he would say, how much do we have in the bank? And the accountant would say, we have 12,000 dinars. He would say, give it to the beggar. He says, Ibn Rasulillah, we won't have anything. He says, don't worry, have husn of dhan billah. Think good of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning money comes, money goes. Today we lose, but tomorrow wealth will come back to us. At times you found, what's interesting is that Imam Hasan alayhi salam, he would look after 2 types of individuals within his community. There were those who were left as widows and orphans because their fathers and their husbands were killed in the Battle of Siffin. So the Imam took on the responsibility to sponsor them. Every month he would send money towards these families. And there were many families who lost the breadwinners. And of course, at times there were the one-offs when people would come towards him and then they would seek help and the Imam alayhi salam would help them. These were one-off occasions. At time, for example, Ibn Sharh Ashub mentions in his book a questionable hadith. There's no doubt to it. But again, it highlights the generosity of the Imam alayhi salam. He goes towards Muawiyah. Muawiyah summons the Imam alayhi salam. When he summons him, he has an affair with him, has some dealings with him, and then the Imam alayhi salam leaves. When he leaves, Muawiyah gifts him and presents him with a lot of wealth. The Imam alayhi salam takes the wealth and he leaves. When he leaves, he sees a servant mending his own shoes. He approaches the servant and he gives all of the wealth to this servant. Again, it's a questionable hadith. Why would Imam Hasan alayhi salam accept gifts from Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan? But at the same time, it highlights it. The essence of this hadith is to highlight the generosity. And it's not something to be considered far-fetched, considering all of the different acts of generosity he's done throughout his life. At times, someone would come towards him and say, Ibn Rasulillah, you give your entire wealth and half of your wealth and a major part of your wealth. Why? There's no need at times, upon which the Imam alayhi salam replies beautifully. He says, Allah has habituated, Allah has made it a habit to present me and to gift me with wealth. And I have made it a habit to give it away. I am afraid that one day, if I break my habit, Allah will break His habit with me. And so in terms of his wealth, he would give away a lot from his wealth. Then, of course, in terms of his kindness was also towards his enemies or people who considered him to be their enemies. You find, for example, the famous narration when that Shami comes towards the Imam alayhi salam. When he sees the Imam, he begins this barrage of abuse. He begins this abuse towards the Imam. Your father is this, your father is that, your father is this and that. The Imam for a few minutes listens to his abuse and then the Imam turns to him. The companions are around him. The Imam says to him, it seems that you are a stranger in these lands. If you're in need of hospitality, then come. My house is available. Stay with us for a few days and I will be hospitable towards you. If you are hungry, I will feed you. If you are thirsty, I will provide you with anything you need. If you are in need of shelter, my home is available. You found that here the Imam alayhi salam, when he began to present his kindness towards a person who was vile towards him, with the amount of abuse that was directed towards him, it melted his heart. They say that this person lived with the Imam for 3 days. When he lived with the Imam for 3 days, as he was leaving, he begs forgiveness. And he says, Ya ibn Rasulillah, now I understand that Allah is the one who chooses who to carry His message. Allahu a'lamu haythu yaj'alu risalati. Allah knows where to place His message and to whom to give it to. Hey, what's interesting with the examination of this hadith, it's not that the Imam alayhi salam suppressed his anger and he held himself back, or for example, he was very tired of confronting the person or scared to confront the person. No, the Imam naturally from within chose to act with kindness. How is that possible? There are certain riwayat that the Imam alayhi salam had the tongue of his father. Imam Ali alayhi salam, with his grudge against Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, the Imam did not hold back when he begins to describe Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. Likewise, Imam Hasan alayhi salam, at times when his staunch enemies attacked him, the Imam would attack back with words. One of the greatest insults that was directed to Muawiyah, when the peace treaty was signed, Muawiyah would flaunt his success over Imam Hasan alayhi salam. And then the Imam, after, he would stand in public and he would say, Muawiyah, let me remind who you are and let me remind the people who I am. He says, Ya Muawiyah, you are the son of Abi Sufyan, whereas my father is Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. He says, Muawiyah, your mother is Hind, the liver eater, whereas my mother is Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam. He says, your grandfather was Harb, my grandfather was Rasulullah sallallahu. These are insults, a very polite way of insulting Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. And it would infuriate him. The Imam knew how to speak and how to retaliate in terms of words. But with regards to the Shami, the Imam knew that this person was a jahil. This person was fed the wrong information for many years. He had constructed a worldview that was away from haqq. Idfa' billati hiya ahsan. Retaliate with that which is good. And that's exactly what the Imam alayhi salam does. Naturally, he begins to act out in goodness and kindness. He gives goodness and kindness towards this person and he wins his heart over. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the wasila and the shafa'ah of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam to give us, to forgive our sins. Ya Allah, give us the opportunity, the tawfiq to visit his shrine, to visit Jannat al-Baqi, inshallah, to be able to perform his ziyarah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive the sins of our marhumin, inshallah. Wa akhir al-da'wan, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa alihi tayyibin at-tahirin.